episode number 7. What do you think we're going to be moving on to today? How to study? Yes, so I made a promise that once we'd finished episodes 1 to 6, that after the, yes?
The identify.
Right, so we're going to go and have a look at number 1, which is? Identify. And just for argument's sake, what is step number 2?
Is
Summarize.
Summarize. Bridget, number 3. It sounds like this, but it starts with an M.
Member.
Thank you.
Isn't it with one M?
Yeah, I don't know,
Two
it's
M's,
one.
But that take away that double M.
Then it becomes a memorize, no?
Memo. Because memo is.
Sorry, 1 M. Right, the boss has spoken, it's 1 M, memorize. Right. And number 4?
Test.
Yes,
Test.
test self. Right. Right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about identify and how you get to the space of identifying. If you get this right, it'll halve your studying time because it means you're studying the right stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so how do we identify what we have to study for an exam?
Teachers.
Right, so yes?
The teachers would usually sometimes give you a breakdown of what to study.
Okay. Yes?
See the subject.
Sorry?
See the subject.
Have a look at the subject. Yes? Are you talking about the subject of a specific thing or the actual subject, like geography? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah?
You see what you've done in the previous time
Okay.
or the previous day.
Okay. So here's a question to get your thoughts going. Why do you have to come to school to be educated? Why do you come to school to be educated? Do you need to come to school to be educated?
Oh, yes and no.
So talk to me about that.
But yes, because the school is actually known for educating
Okay.
children. But no, because some people have been homeschooled,
Okay. So what is happening at home school?
where you're learning you're learning the work, but you're not really applying it. Should I say?
Possibly. So the difference between you getting a textbook and going and reading the textbook and doing the activities and what happens at school is what? You could do that at home, couldn't you? Except?
You at school you can ask questions. At home you can't.
So part of the learning process is questions and answers, but a very important part of the learning process is having a teacher. What is a teacher's function in the process of learning? Yes?
To help children understand.
Okay, so there's the understanding element of it. I don't understand, can you explain it to me? They break it down and you understand the concepts.
Discipline.
Discipline, making you do the work, yeah?
Yeah.
What else?
Peer, extrinsic
Motivation.
motivation.
Yeah, that would be extrinsic motivation. But there's something that you guys don't know about because it's not something you see happening in the class. The class is a result of it. And that is, there is a framework that the teacher understands in terms of how to structure the lessons so that you get all the work finished on time. They also know what is going to be tested. In other words, what the outcomes or the learning objectives are. Does that make sense? Do you know what those learning objectives are? Can you find out what those learning objectives are? Now, sometimes they're called aims as well, the aims of the lesson. Do you know where that comes from? Have you seen that kind of thing before? Right. So, I want to take us back a little bit of history to understand how a textbook gets written and how curriculum gets written. Because if you understand that, then you'll understand how to find what you need to study and what's important. And what's important about identify is not only the what, in other words, content, you also got to understand the how. In other words, at what level do I need to demonstrate?
Like what cognitive level?
Is that where the cognitive level is?
Exactly. And that is your. So, as you can see, we can't talk about identifying what to study without talking a little bit about cognitive levels as well. All right. So, here's your little quick history lesson. You started school in grade 0. You may finish school in grade 12. And it might feel like 13 years of I don't know what and how it's all going together, but there is a structured process to it.
Well, in grade 1 to 2,
Yeah.
it was basically cutting and sticking and drawing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it was also learning to read,
That is, yeah, okay.
because that's the most important thing. So,
And alphabet.
they say basically they work backwards. At the end of grade 12, according to international standards and the requirements of universities or tertiary educations, students need to be able to, in maths, demonstrate the following. In maths, lit, do this thing. In history, do this, then the next thing. Am I right?
Yeah.
So those are the outcomes for matric. That's what we're working towards. Okay? And then what they do is they break down and say, well, if they're going to have to do that in maths in grade 12, what are they going to have to do preceding that to be able to do that in grade 12? So in grade 11, we have to do this. And in grade 10, we have to do this. In grade 8 and 9, we have to do the following.
Yeah.
And it breaks it all the way down into grade 1, where you have to start learning
The numbers.
1 plus 1 is 2. Does that make sense?
That's more like grade 3 work.
Okay. Do you all understand that? Okay. So, let me ask you this question. Who writes textbooks? Yes?
Teachers?
No.
University lecturers.
University? No. Sorry? No.
The government?
Sorry?
The government?
The government? Definitely not. Yes?
Professors?
No.
Winners.
People. Okay, that's a very important. Who have you looked at the name of your textbook?
Company.
Thank you. Companies write textbooks. Okay? Why do companies write textbooks?
So they can make money.
So they can make money. That's why companies write textbooks.
To help students learn?
No,
No.
they do it to make money.
Sorry.
They don't care about it.
That's the real motivator.
So, sorry, Gareth. No, they don't. So, guys, the government has got two functions when it comes to your education. The one is to tell people what the outcomes are that they expect them to have, okay? And to test those outcomes through the examination board. And to provide the framework, which is the CAPS document, from grade 1 to matric, on how and where they want stuff done in a year. Does that make sense?
So is that where the companies look at the CAPS document and then make the textbooks?
And that's why no single textbook is the same. All the outcomes are the same, but the way they get there are different.
Yeah, very.
Does that make sense? So some have a different focus to others. I like Platinum for most of the subjects. Spot On is good for some others. It all depends on the teacher and what is going on. So when you said who writes what, now the company says they don't even have to go to the government. They just say, I'm going to write a textbook. You can go and write a textbook right now. Okay?
And actually care about students.
The point that I'm trying to make is that the company has to write a textbook. What do?
They need to see the requirements.
Do they know the requirements? They've got the framework. So what they do is they get a curriculum expert and says, in grade 1, we're going to do maths. In grade 1, they need to do this. They break it down into chunks in their textbook and how they want to do it. And then they put it in. They say, right, Aiden, you're good at the addition. Chloe, you're good at the subtraction. You two are going to write a chapter on that and that. Those are the outcomes. So by the end of your activities and everything that's happening,
So basically they hire teachers and like experts to come in and
that's it.
explain things in the textbook.
So usually what they do is they don't actually hire teachers to write the textbooks. They hire what they call subject experts. People who have studied to maybe a master's or PhD level in that particular subject. They then give it to teachers to check and get feedback because the teachers are the one using it in the classroom.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? They might use teachers if they've got spare time and things. My feeling is that the best textbooks are textbooks that are written by teachers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A good teacher doesn't need a textbook to teach. They know what the outcomes are. These things, they know what they are. And then they can teach. They can use this textbook because that explains it better there. They use that textbook there. They use the internet there because it provides the content and helps you understand it better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
So, when I asked the question, how do you know what you are going to get in your tests or what you're going to be tested on? You said the teacher tells me.
Huh?
You said the teacher tells me. They give me a scope on what's going on.
Oh, yes.
So how does the teacher know? Do they have a magic wand that they wave?
No, they've written the test. They've made the test
They've set the test. Based on what?
based on the curriculum and what they've taught you.
On the textbook.
So you've got the right answer there, based on the curriculum, which is because CAPS, the document, tells you what you need to know and at what level you have to be tested at.
But now we're IEB.
So,
So what's the difference between CAPS and IEB?
So-
Just the testing.
Perhaps in the textbook, IEP is a form of them.
well, I'm glad that you distinguish between the two of them. CAPS is a framework, okay? And even if you're writing, might be going into too much detail right now. When you get to grade 12, there are 3 examination boards. There are 3 examination boards, okay? The first one is the government, so we call it the GED. The second one is IEB. And the third one is Sakai, how do you spell that? AI, I think. Those are your examination boards.
Yeah.
This is for government schools, and I think what, 350,000, 600,000 learners.
Yeah.
600,000 learners wrote the GED matric exam. IB, I think it was about 2,500, 2,800 learners wrote to the IB exam. And Sakai, I don't know what the numbers are, but Sakai is for your homeschool and distant learners. Okay? So there are 3 examination boards. Do you remember when we said goodbye to the students at our valediction, the matrics, each year? The moment they walk out that gate, they are no longer our responsibility as a school. We've done our job. We have taught them everything. They now fall under the examination boards. So the examination boards are now in control of them, and we are accredited by Umalusi to allow the students to write that. Remember when they came and spoke to you guys and we had the whole test that day that they were here?
Yeah.
Umalusi also gives those examination boards permission to be able to set exams because they're setting them at the right standard based on the CAPS document.
So CAPS.
Is the South African educational legislation when it comes to educating matrics, etc. So because that's directly with the GED, when you go to the IEB have said that's fine, CAPS is what we're using. We have to use CAPS within the South African education system.
Yeah.
But IEB is a more exclusive examination board,
Yeah.
which means we generally raise
The bar.
the bar when it comes to your cognitive levels. Not significantly, but we have a higher expectation of problem solving and higher order cognitive thinking. So what we've done is we've taken CAPS and we've added another layer on top of that called the SAGS documents. So it's the IEB's interpretation of CAPS. Are you all with me?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So now
So-
IEB is more.
And the SAGS documents are available for grade 10 to 12.
So when we start learning IEB, we're still learning CAPS. It's just we're go into greater detail with certain things too.
You've got another layer over the top, exactly. And the SAGS documents only really talk to grade 12. So we as a school and our clusters and our headmaster meetings and all of that work it backwards to grade 4, because that's what we have in the school, on how we are going to get the students to grade 12 with CAPS, but with the IEB's understanding and requirements.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And
So-
is that why you've gone IEB, is because it's a more advanced way of learning, it's better, it gives us more knowledge.
Helps you apply.
Primarily because it has high order cognitive thinking, and secondly, we feel that a lot of private educational institutions, tertiary institutions, are going to see the IEB as a preferential examination board and give students with an IEB matric more advantage in getting into private universities.
Yeah.
Is it true or not? I don't know yet, but I do know that some universities, I've heard of one that if you've got a GED matric, you have to do your degree over 4 years. If you've got an IB matric, they'll allow you to do it over 3 years, which is normal. Okay. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
So with that structure in mind, that framework,
Yeah.
this is what we're working in. You can go right now, download the CAPS document, and look at what you have to do and at what level. You might not be able to interpret it,
Understand.
but it tells you exactly. And that's the CAPS document and the SAG document say 30% of your paper needs to be cognitive level 1. 30% of your paper needs to be cognitive level number 2. 40% of your paper needs to be cognitive level number 3.
So then we go and we look at the cognitive levels, and when we're studying, we ask those cognitive level questions based on what percentage of the paper it's going to be, and we go and we ask those questions in each subject, and each, like, let's say, subtopic in the subject.
So you're on the right track there, Aidan. But I'm going to make it a little bit more simple for you because it looks like quite a big picture to try and understand. Mercedes, are you with me? Damien? You guys understanding? Right. So when it comes to identifying what you have to study and at what level, it's not actually rocket science.
Yeah.
Okay? You don't have to go and look at the CAPS document, and the teachers will assist you. What you need to go and look at is, number one, you need to go and have a look at the activities in your textbooks,
Yeah.
because the activities will guide you into what you have to know. And specifically, the revision activities. And I'm not saying they're the be-all and end-all, but how they ask the question and the how is the verbs. Okay? How they ask the question and what they are asking, which is the content,
What they want you to.
what they want you to understand. If the revision activity has nothing on labeling a frog, it's very unlikely that you will need to label a frog. Does that make sense? Labeling a frog, what cognitive level is that?
Depends. Do you give the labels?
2.
Labeling a frog, what are you doing?
Oh. And then
You're identifying, am I right? Identify is cognitive level
1.
number 1. They may ask you a question about the parts of a frog in cognitive level 3 by comparing a frog to a rabbit, for example, but you don't have to sit and label it. Does that make sense? Okay, so we look at our activities and we can see specifically in the revision activities what content we have to know. So you can look, if let's say for example, you're doing life science and Dr. Makings is teaching you about the eye, and it's quite a long chapter and it's an important one, and you want to know what you have to know by the end of this unit. Go into the revision activity, look at the content. I have to know this, 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 this. They talk about the cornea, they talk about the iris, they talk about the optic nerve, all of that kind of thing. Look at what they're asking you about that content, okay?
Yeah.
And then you can go and summarize that. That'll give you 90% of what you have to know, because it's directing you to what you have to study. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, once we have an idea of what we are studying and how we are studying it, we then can go on to the next step, which is to summarize it. Okay. The teacher will do this specifically as well. They might go and refer to the CAPS document as well. The teacher will also give you, and often what happens in the textbook is at the beginning of the unit, they might have a little heading that says the learning outcomes. You will be able to. By the end of this unit, you will be able to dum bum dum dum bum. Does that make sense?
In this unit, we will be learning this.
Exactly. Those are the learning objectives and learning outcomes. So don't look at it and go, make notes of it, because those are going to be headings. Guys, the most important part of those questions is the verbs. You all know what a verb is, yes? This is a werkswoord, a working, a doing word. Okay, and that's how we classify the cognitive levels using Bloom's taxonomy, so that you understand at what level you have to demonstrate it. You guys got that?
Got that.
Right, so next time, so essentially, you know what's going to be in your June exam or your July exam already.
If we do this.
You know what's going to be in your exam. In fact, you know what's going to be in your final exam. Because
We've gone through.
you can look, the teachers are focusing you on stuff. You've got revision activities. In fact, some of your textbooks have even got mock exams and tests. Am I right?
Yeah.
Those are going to be helping you, pushing you in this direction. What do I have to study and how do I have to know it? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, have you all made notes on this? So Gareth, I asked the question again. How do you know what you have to study?
You look at your revision activities.
Yeah.
You can take it out with the teachers, or you can look at the task breakdown.
Yeah. CAPS alone while you're in an IB school is not going to give you sufficiently exactly what you need to know, because the teachers have filtered it down from the SAGS document. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that falls under identify. So now we know, for example, let's using our eye analogy again. We have to understand the structure of the eye. We have to know how the lens works, how the iris works, the cornea, what the function of that is, what the optic nerve does, and how it works in your brain and connects to your brain and interprets the images. We know all of that.
Yeah.
Now we want to start by identifying what part of that is important. And to do that, we need to see if they use the word list or identify. What do you have to know? You have to go and learn and memorize the labels. If you see the eye, you must learn to memorize it. Nice and easy, am I right? But if they start using the words compare,
Compares cognitive level 4.
and if they use give examples, own, or create, or how would apply, let's use the word apply, we are starting to look at two sets of knowledge. Give your own examples demonstrates that you can generate and create something on your own. When you're applying something, you are using it. And that's where it gets a little bit more challenging, because not only do you have to memorize things, you also have to know how they fit together in systems. Does that make sense? Your eye on its own, your eyeball on its own, does not work independently. It has muscles, it connects to your brains. You do know that the image that your brain sees is actually upside down.
And then your brain flips it.
Your brain flips it around.
Whoa.
Okay,
Whoa.
all right. So, this ties into the next step, which is summarize, but we look at keywords.
Definition.
Definitions. What else? Once you've got keywords, what have you got? Yes? Phrases, headings,
Topics.
topics. Now, the key to summarizing and taking what you've identified is creating a structure and a framework for you to put knowledge in. Does that make sense? All right. So, in keywords, definitions, phrases, headings, topics, what do you think the top one would be? The first one that covers the most in terms of the hierarchy of information is? Yes?
Topics.
Topics. So at the top we have, these are the topics. The topic is very easy. It's the I. Does that make sense? There's one above this. It could be the subject. What is the subject? Life science or biology. Okay? So we have a topic. Within the I, what do you think the headings might be? Yes?
The different components.
Components.
The lens,
Yeah, lens, iris.
Lens with
Right, lens of the knee. The iris, the cornea, optic nerve, brain. So those may be your topics. Where have you got this information from?
From your,
Writing.
Which writing?
from the textbook.
Okay, so where? Do you just flip through it and write down the topic?
From the page numbers.
Guys, you need to work backwards. If you just open the chapter and it says the I, and you go through all the headings and start summarizing that, you don't know at what level you need to summarize it.
Is it not?
Oh.
Damn it.
I'll take the high five, the fist pump back. Thank you very much. Right. You might be adding information that is irrelevant, or you're adding information at the wrong cognitive level. You need to be aware of this. So you would go through and quickly make a note in your head of what it is. But you would go and look at this, the revision activities and the exam activities. And Chloe, what you might find is they don't even talk about Cleo, sorry. They don't even find the brain in that. Okay? And they don't even talk about the optic nerve at all. Are we going to make study notes on that?
No.
Because even if it is a question in the paper, is it going to be worth the amount of time and effort that if it's a left-wing question coming out? No. Because if you do this, you've got 90% of the information you need already. Does that make sense?
No.
When we start understanding what summarizing is, which is reducing information, this is working smart. The next step would be to go, right, those are the 3 topics that are going to be in there, okay? Sorry, topics there, those are the headings. What words are we looking for? What are we looking for now in terms of a hierarchy that might help us? Yes?
Definitions.
Right, so the definitions are very important. Remember in the prefix meeting yesterday we spoke about the jargon. Using definitions basically uses correct words. It uses the correct words. You can't say, and you're like, the eye's got this stuff inside that is like water, and it kind of like protects the eye and helps the image. Can you do that? You can, but what are you telling the person who's examining you? Does it demonstrate you understand what you're talking about and the concepts that you're talking about?
It makes you feel, when they read it, it makes you...
It looks like this.
It makes it look like you're unsure of your answer.
And that you're an idiot. That you haven't actually gone and studied the stuff, okay? So use the correct words to explain and describe. It gives more credibility, and you will get the benefit of the doubt, yes?
Phrase. You just said phase.
The phrase.
You said phase, not phrase.
Phrase, sorry. Clearly I need another cup of coffee, hey? Right, so use the correct words, use the correct phrases to describe things. Does that make sense, guys? The definitions will also give you some of the key words that you are going to then describe, yes?
Isn't phrase, but with PH.
Yeah, that's what I was...
R-A-S-E.
R-A-S-E, that's what I was pointing out.
Ah, I see.
You said phrase, it's just you didn't write it down
Right.
correctly.
So, guys, we've got the topic. We've looked at our revision activities and past papers for the the headings that are going to be important. We are now looking at the definitions for those words so we know what they are.
Yeah.
The definition might include a picture so that you've got a picture in your mind of it. Okay? The last thing we're going to start looking at is your keywords. Now your keywords are going to be related back to your verbs and the content. Okay.
Okay.
The verbs tell you how you must demonstrate the knowledge and at what level you need to
Yeah.
demonstrate it at. I'm going to give you, make available on the video, the Bloom's taxonomy, which you can download and print off. And it gives you the kind of questions and things, and that's what the teachers use as well. Okay. I'm not going to give it to you as a piece of paper because it'll just end up in the bottom of your cupboard somewhere. Yeah.
I remember when we did study skills last year.
Yes.
When we were writing our cycle test, like our class tests.
Yes.
We asked the teacher if we could just bring in the Bloom's taxonomy, like just the paper.
Yes.
No notes on it. It's
Yes.
just,
To help with the cognitive
yeah.
levels.
And it actually, I got 78% for that paper.
Because you understand what they're asking you.
Yeah.
Comprehensions in English are exactly the same, guys. Understanding the verb, give the right information. Does that make sense? Okay, so once we've got all of this in place, we can move on to the next step, which is summarize. Okay.
So making notes, making mind maps.
Now
Yes.
we know what we need to. Now we know what we need to. Now we've identified what we need to summarize.
So guys, I'm going to give you an analogy which I hope you will understand. Who of you have been away on holiday? Gone on holiday for more than 2 weeks at a time to a place that is not your home?
Yeah.
Okay? So, when you are going on holiday, do you take everything out of your cupboard and put it into the suitcase and put it in the car? No? No.
Unless you're going to like a different country.
What do you do? Even if you're going to a different country, you go and look at the weather.
You look at what you need and what you don't need.
Yeah, you look at the weather, so you know if you're going to pack for warm or cold. You look at the activities you're going to engage in. I'm going to put a swimming costume in. I'm going to put my hiking boots in. I'm going to put a little rucksack in because I'm going to be carrying a day bag or something like that. Okay? You know that you're going to be on an airplane for 16 hours. You need a change of clothes, underpants, or whatever the case would be, and another t-shirt because you don't want to get out the airport and smell like a foot. You know, things like that. Put toothpaste in because you want to brush your teeth after 16 hours in air. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You are planning. You're looking ahead, identifying what you're going to do and what you're going to possibly do, and then you're going to pack. And you might put one or two, maybe I'll need that, maybe I will need that. Does that make sense? This is exactly the same thing. Most of you guys, when you're studying at the moment, you're packing the entire wardrobe into the cupboard and going on holiday for 2 weeks. Are you going to even use half the stuff in that cupboard? You're just going to be lugging it around. Would you rather have had a suitcase, same size suitcase, less stuff in? What can you bring back? All the souvenirs and stuff you bought from your holiday. Does that make sense? Worst case scenario, you've forgotten something. I forgot my toothpaste. I didn't bring the shampoo. What are you going to do? I'll just go and buy the shampoo or borrow it. Simple as that. Does that make sense? Does an analogy work for you? Yeah. Right. Any questions before we move on to this or move away from this? So I'm going to give you an example, a practical, real example. Last year, Mrs. Aitchison and I wrote 8 exams. Okay? UNISA exams, 8 of them. And being UNISA, did we go to a classroom? No. Do we have a teacher telling us what to study? No. So how did we know what to go and study? Did we just study the whole textbook?
You know,
Mrs. Aitchison, did we study the whole textbook?
you refer to people that are doing the same courses.
No. Mrs. Aitchison was. The two of us sat there going, what did we do? What did I do? Tell me what I did.
You looked at past papers or something, so you studied,
Yes?
and then identified keywords and definitions.
It's exactly what we did. So what we did was, on the UNISA website, the lecturers would say, we cannot give you a demarcation, go and study everything. So what did we do? They gave us 5 past papers. So we started with paper 1 and wrote down everything like I've just said. Content and how it was described. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I must know this content and how it's described, this content, how it's described, etc. Paper 2, same thing. And what you find is it asks you the same content, maybe at a different cognitive level, and you add 1 or 2 pieces that the first paper didn't have.
Yeah.
We did that with all 5 papers. It gives us a very comprehensive idea of the content and how they're asking the questions. We know that this content, they asked out of the papers 4 times, and 3 of the times they asked at a higher cognitive level. So what does it mean? We have to know this at a higher cognitive level.
Yeah.
So we got very, very good marks for our exams. The marks we didn't get were that little 10%, which they just slid in or what wasn't in the previous paper. Does that make sense? It meant that we spent our time doing something efficiently. The right amount of time on the most amount of important work.
And you can't get a perfect paper. You'll never get a perfect paper unless you...
You shouldn't, because then the paper hasn't challenged you enough.
Yeah.
So do you guys understand what I'm saying? If you took the IAB past papers for the last 5 years and did exactly that, you would have 90% of what they're going to test you on. You got it? Okay. So now we get to step 2, which is? So summarizing has one purpose. What is the purpose of summarizing? Yes? Shorten. Reduce. Make less.
Yeah.
Makes it easier for you to study.
Content less so that you've got less to study. Okay. So the first step of making less is identifying correctly what you have to study, which we've done. The second step is the information you put down is put down in the least possible amount so that you can expand it. And they call it the Alice process. You know from Alice in Wonderland? So Alice was big when she went down the rabbit hole. She had to get through a little door like this. She took a pull, shrunk down, went through the hole, took another pull, and popped up as Alice again. Now, this is how the Alice process should look like. 100%, maybe 50%, and 100% again. Okay? This is your input. This is your summary. And this is your test. So all information reduced to that amount, and then you can expand it again to the full content. Does that make sense? Would you like to know what boys' Alice process normally looks like?
Oh, no.
Because that's probably about 10%. Okay?
So that's hurtful.
This is what girls' Alice process looks like. Because this is about 90%. And I'm generalizing, but girls put too much information in and boys put too little information in. So you've got to find, and the only way to find out what your personal threshold is when it comes to the optimum amount of information is to do it and see what works.
So like you study and then you do a paper that you've never seen before.
That's the final one, which is test yourself, and that's where it comes in. So when Mrs. H and I were looking at our notes from last year, they were very different, covered the same content, and the same. Mrs. Aitchison expanded on some stuff more than I did, and vice versa. Our notes are entirely different. The end result,
Same.
very similar in a lot of the subjects. Does that make sense? Because it's a personal process. Okay. So we reduce the information, and then we can expand it again. All right. Who's got this problem, that they don't put enough in their notes? Yeah, Damien? Who's got this problem where they put too much in? Yeah. Usually you put too much in when you are scared. So it's based in fear. I don't want to leave that out. I don't want to. And this is because I don't have enough time
I don't care.
or I'm lazy.
All confident.
Okay. All right. Finding the golden spot for yourself is the confidence. Being comfortable with what you're doing. All right. So, summarizing is about reducing. Okay? And most of the process, the studying part of summarizing, do you believe that you are studying information when you're summarizing? Or is it just a process of information in and that's that? Do you believe there's a study part to this?
Yeah.
So what is the study part to it? Yes?
When you've reviewed the information that you want to minimize,
Yes.
You've related it.
then you put it into a way that you understand it also.
Okay, so I want to focus on what you said in a way that you understand it. Because the study part of this is about taking the information
Yeah.
and organizing it in a way that works for your mind. Does that make sense? So the study part of this is in the organization and the categorization. Category, right.
It's
So-
fine.
Categorization of it. Okay. Now, when you say to most students, study skills, what's the first thing that pops in their mind?
Study.
Yes.
To study.
Mind maps. I've done this course for a long time. I know how to do mind maps. I've done the study skills course. Is mind maps studying?
No.
Mind maps falls into
Organization.
the organization and the categorization. In other words, it is one of the many ways that you can use to organize and categorize the information. And obviously, as Lesedi said, you are reading through the work. And in order to organize and categorize, you need to read with understanding. You need to read with understanding so that you can organize and categorize. Yes.
You also have to know what learning style is best for you.
And we're going to get to that. Okay. So, what determines how you organize and categorize the information? Yes?
You know your learning style.
Right. So, learning style. Your learning style. What else? We'll talk about learning style now. What else determines that?
Whatever determines understanding.
Yes?
The learning, I want to say syllabus, or not syllabus,
The content.
content.
The content will dictate this because certain content lends itself to bullet form or a flow chart or a mind map. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Ms. Schreling has spoken to you about, not mind maps, what is that? Thinking maps. So the different thinking maps for the different content. The other thing that will also talk to you about this is your cognitive level.
And it's Mrs. Ostrowik.
Mrs. Ostrowik. So that will determine what this looks like. And that's why everybody's notes will look different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's very difficult to change when it says draw and label the eye. That's pretty much draw and label the eye.
That's where everyone's notes are going to be quite similar.
Similar, all right? But where they might differ is that when it comes to the definitions, Gareth might just write the definition next to the label so that it's all part of the picture because he's a visual learner,
Yeah.
whereas someone else might go and write the definitions and highlight them blue because it works better separately for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your learning styles. They identify different thoughts on this. The most common is that you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. Okay? So visual learners are learners who learn through seeing, colors, pictures. Okay? Auditory learners are learners who take a lot of the information in, they process the information by listening, talking, discussing. And kinesthetic learners are learners who movement, they must do, they must build. So robotics
See
is,
how it works,
yes.
to understand it.
And there's
Isn't there one more?
I beg your pardon?
Isn't there one more?
no
Written, isn't it?
reading and writing.
Is it aesthetic? So there's a guy called Howard Gardner who also came up with different learning styles, and he's started off with, I think it was initially 7 and has now gone to 9. Go and do a little bit of research, write his name down. Howard Gardner.
It's actually spelled Gardner.
Yeah, Gardner. Howard Gardner. And what is it called? Theory of Multiple Intelligences. Go and have a look at that as a little bit of a reference, because it expands a little bit on just how you take it in. In my mind, he talks about your mind's predilection, your talents, more than how you process information.
Yeah.
So I'm also going to put a little test up that you guys are going to have to do online, that you're going to, and it'll give you a score on what kind of learner you are, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. So who thinks that they are only visual learners?
My favorite pictures.
Yes.
That's me.
Okay. Who is only an auditory learner? Who is only a kinesthetic learner? So you've got to be careful of the word only. Okay. So you walked right into my trap. Okay. And the reason why is that you've got eyes. Do you have ears? Can you hear? Can you move around? Which means that we take the information in with all our senses, but we have a preference for one. Does that make sense? So if you had to combine it in a percentage for yourself, and it must equal a total of 100, what would you put yourself in terms of that? So Shante, much higher on the visual for yourself, but there's got to be some auditory and kinesthetic in there. Does that make sense? So what does it look like? You have to understand your mind to be able to do this, yes? Yes?
Well, kinesthetics, I'd say probably 70%.
Okay.
Visual 20 and then auditory 10.
Okay. So do you think that changes for different subjects and different content?
Yes.
Okay. That's an important thing to understand. So for me, mostly, I'm a visual kinesthetic person, which means I can, if I want to remember a telephone number, I see my hand writing it on a board, the number. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I can remember because I see my hand, the muscle memory is part of how I memorize it. If I'm singing music, I can visualize the notes in front of me and I'm sight reading the music in front of me. But there's some songs that I've learned just by listening. And I don't even know what the notes look like. When it comes to English, for example, the languages, I'm very much an auditory learner. I need to discuss it because that's when the ideas come, and how I hear it being spoken in my head and etc. is how I write it down. Does that make sense? So defining yourself as only visual is dangerous because it means that you don't allow yourself to look at other things as well. Does that make sense? Different circumstances. And that's something, guys, you need to understand for yourself. So I'm going to give you another example. Studying Mrs. H and myself again, you're going to get sick and tired of hearing it, but it's this in practice. So I'm studying a section of work. It's a lot of work. It's a textbook like this, and it's a 2-hour exam. I've got to get the information in my head. I know there's a lot of stuff I need to memorize, so there's terms and definitions, and I'm busy using mnemonics to memorize it. I've got a little saying, and then I know how I can populate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then I'm looking through another section, and I'm going, right, I know somebody like that. There's an example of it. I'll memorize it because there's an association with people. Then I get to this long case study. How do I remember that? Then I'm like, okay, I need to tell a story. So I create a narrative like a cartoon strip in my mind that I'm telling the story with all the details that go with it. It's easy to remember the story like that.
Or like what I like to do is that if there's a case study,
Yes.
I like to almost imagine that I'm explaining it to someone. I'm explaining what I read in that case study
Yes.
to someone.
Yep. So teaching it. There was another section that I said to Mrs. H, let me teach this to you because I'd like to remember it because I'm teaching it to you. That was one exam paper. Different content, but the content described how I was going to use this to memorize it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So don't just limit yourself. This one formula works for everything.
Yeah, it won't.
It doesn't always work like that, okay? So the content, the cognitive level, they will also determine how you are going to explain it or how you are going to summarize. Okay. I'm going to carry on with the summarizing next week. We're going to start looking at the thinking maps and how it works and the cognitive levels and tying them in together. Because unless you get the identify and the summarize correctly, don't even bother memorizing it because you'll be memorizing the wrong stuff. Does that make sense? You guys with me?
Yes.
It's one of the reasons why step number 1 and step number 2 should be happening
Sync.
in class.
Yeah.
If you are being taught and you have this in your mind while you're doing it, you are going to be taking in the right information. Does that make sense? You're already making your notes and creating the framework that you're going to use for your summaries. Yeah.
That's what I found when I was in Mr. Mpofu's class, like
Yes.
his subject. I got a lot better marks
Yeah.
because the way he accommodated how he taught for each learning style.
Yeah.
And we did notes in class, we did activities in class. So that helped us identify what we need to learn
Yes.
and summarize it by doing the activities and making new notes on it before the exam.
Yeah. Guys, this is very big part of learning. If you categorize and organize the information and the correct information, you've already got halfway there because you are reading with understanding. You have got the important stuff down. This is the heavy lifting, guys. This is the hard part. This is the learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions for me? Any thoughts? No? No? Right, so there are going to be two things. I'd like you to go and research Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. It's useful. It'll take you 10 minutes to read it and see, and you will identify with certain things. Okay? Multiple intelligences.
Yeah, I just, this is fine.
Okay. The second thing is I'm going to make the Bloom's taxonomy available to you. Download it. It's better to print it in color so that you can see what's going on. And I just need to explain quickly with that. There are 6 levels to Bloom's taxonomy. You hear me talking about level 1 and level 2 and level 3. It's because in the CAPS document they've divided it into the levels like that, guys. So level 1 is level 1 and 2. Level 2 is level 3 and 4, and level 3 is level 5 and 6. So if someone says Bloom's taxonomy cognitive level number 6, or they say cognitive level number 3, are you saying is 3 the highest? Yes, then you know it's referring to 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So don't get confused between it, you need clarity on it, yeah?
My stepsister's in a private school also, and we
Yes.
follow the same syllabus.
Yes,
When I see her studying, I see her highlighting everything.
yes,
And I explain to her that it's not, like it doesn't work.
yeah.
But she's like, no, it does. It works
Okay.
for me. How is that possible?
So what you're going to find, go and talk to your grade 10s, 11s and 12s. You can get away with memorizing everything in grade 7, 8 and 9 because you don't have that much work. And cognitively, it's more about the facts at this point. There's not a lot of higher order cognitive thinking. You cannot do that when you're in the FET because the amount of work you have to do is going to kill you. You have to think smart about it. And the reason why it's a good habit to get into now is that everybody thinks, oh, matric is so hard. Matric is just one little step. When you go to varsity, that's when you really have to know how to study properly.
Yeah.
You know, Sophia, one of our matrics, who knew Sophia? You knew Sophia. Sophia came back and she had done her first semester of varsity. And she'd been having a great time, and suddenly she's like, I really need to do well. And she came back and she said, Mrs. Aitchison, I didn't know what to do. So what did I do? I went to the website, I downloaded the EduWing study checklist, and I gave it to my boyfriend and I, and we sat down and we did it the way we were taught, and got great marks for it. Because this is not just about school. Your sister's going to reach a time when she's blanking out, Aiden, when she's not getting all the work done, or when she's suddenly going, but I've learned all the stuff and I got 40%. Why? Because you've only learned cognitive level number 1.
Yeah.
You haven't learned how to apply the information, and you're not demonstrating your information at the correct cognitive level. Yes?
Isn't matric basically a repeat of grade 10 and 11?
No.
It's an advanced.
It's an extension of that.
Extension.
Yeah. Grade 10, 11, and 12 it's one phase. It starts at one point, it ends at the next, and it's built on all that information. So it's not a repeat, it is its own work. Okay. Anything else, guys? Anything you want to add to this? Are you understanding this? Right, who of you are working and starting to move in this direction with your own studies at the moment? Sort of. Okay. Guys, it's trial and error. You will get better as you're doing it. And we are going to practice. Once we've got an idea on how to study, we are going to practice. We are going to actually do it in the class right now. Okay. And that won't be on video because it'll be an activity that we'll make available online.
Yeah.
So Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, Bloom's taxonomy, and the last one is I'm going to put a questionnaire online on what kind of learner you are. And then you can get the feedback on that.
Yeah.
And then we will discuss what you can do and strategies you can employ to help you in the classroom as well as at home. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Right, that ends episode number 7, identify and summarize. And we're going to do a little bit more summarizing and practicing next week.